Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Ben Williams from Forward Community Investments, and we're really excited to have you join us for today's presentation. Just before we get started, I'd like to take this opportunity to share a bit of background on how we got here. FCI is celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, and want to commemorate that by just having a learning series that really focuses on the organizations and programs that seek to reduce racial, social, and economic disparities. Over our history, we've strengthened these communities by offering affordable, flexible loans, expert advisory services that can allow organizations to grow sustainably. Our loans, advisory services, and recently added grant funds give FCI the tools to encourage and support initiatives that make positive change possible. BMO Harris Bank is an active partner in Wisconsin communities and demonstrates strong corporate citizenship as an important part of whom they are and how they approach their community, and we'd like to take this opportunity to thank them for their support here, as volunteerism and corporate responsibility are a key part of their culture and demonstrates their commitment and investment to the communities we serve. Before we get started, I want to just go over a couple housekeeping items. First, on your phone, you'll be able to join using audio or your computer speaker, and you can see that dialed in on the left side as the slide shows here. Typically, it's best to use your computer speakers. We ask that everyone mute their lines as they join, so that we can best hear Suzanne as she gives us our presentation today. Next slide, please. We'd like to take a second to go through the questions on the webinar, and so you can submit them there. This is going to be a dynamic and interactive presentation, so if you have questions at any point in time throughout the presentation, do not hesitate to use your chat or question box feature as a way to submit those questions as we go forward. And so to get us started, we're going to begin with a poll, which is what is your role in your organization? And so in just a moment, you will see that come up on your screen, and if you can please submit the answer for you. So are you an executive director, a board member, a staff member, a funder, or an other? So far, we've gotten over 2/3 of the folks voting in, and we have 1/3 are executive directors, about half are staff members, and 15% are board members. We have 90% pulling in, so that looks great. Close that poll and share it for us all. So as we move forward, it looks like we have a good mix of folks from several different areas, and we're excited to have you all join us today. Next, we'd like you to test out that chat feature, and so if in that poll you can submit your name and organization as a way to test that out. This will be how we receive questions and answers throughout the presentation, so please enter those in now so we can move forward. Getting a lot of people starting to submit those in. Thank you. Okay, we are getting a great response. Thank you all for joining us. So we go to the next slide. I'm going to pass it over to Dennis Johnson, who will introduce our speaker for today.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks everyone for joining us. We got some of those housekeeping tasks out of the way, and I want to take this opportunity to introduce Suzanne Swift and Suzanne Swift Consulting for Nonprofits. Suzanne's been a friend and a partner of FCI for many years, and so we're real excited to have her with us today. But today's presentation is really about nonprofits telling their story, and oftentimes we hear in our client work that nonprofits and organizational leaders and communication folks have a difficult time crafting that story and really taking action around it. So many of us are limited with our time and our resources, and so Suzanne's going to discuss today how to craft messages that people will hear and provide ideas to help you develop strategies to meet your communication goals. A little background about Suzanne. Suzanne's a marketing consultant focused on the needs of nonprofits. For almost 15 years, she's been helping organizations identify and address their communication needs, and she's worked hand in hand with a diverse group of clients to provide the strategy development, implementation, needs assessment, training, coaching, research, and facilitation needed to move her clients forward. Suzanne's marketing background includes long-term experience in-house at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, the Women's Funding Alliance, and Alive.com. Before focusing on marketing, Suzanne spent 7 years as a human resources professional This tenure included 5 years at Microsoft, where she managed a wide variety of projects and time working as a human resources consultant for Seattle area startups. Suzanne has taught at the University of Washington and is a regular guest lecturer at the University of Wisconsin. In addition to Suzanne's professional experience, she has over 20 years of board, committee, and volunteer experience with a wide range of organizations here in Madison, Seattle, and the Bay Area. She holds a bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley and an MBA from the University of Washington. So please join me in thanking Suzanne for today's content and welcoming her to the call. Suzanne?
Great. Thank you so much, Dennis, for introducing me. And I just want to take a moment and first of all, thank everyone for choosing to attend today. I think there are about 100 people on the call. And so when I think about the amount of time, 100 nonprofit hours being taken to listen to what I have to say, it's indeed very humbling. So I'll try to rise to that occasion. So thank you very much, Dennis, for that very kind invitation. Ben, for helping me to coordinate and get up to speed on the technology. I really appreciate that. And then also a shout out again to BMO Harris for sponsoring that. I really appreciated that. This is my first webinar, and so I would ask you to please bear with me. I'm a communicator, and I'm used to seeing people in person. I'm used to seeing people nod at me or chuckle or look down at their phones when they get distracted. I can't see which of you are baking pumpkin pies. So when you burn yourself baking your pumpkin pie and you tune out, I can't see that. So I'll do my best to be interesting and entertaining, and please focus on that pie only as much as needed. Please ask questions as we go along. I'm used to getting lots of questions. As this is my first webinar, it might be a little awkward at first, but I'll do my best. And my goal for us today is a little bit like when I purchase a cookbook. When I purchase a cookbook, I think it's successful if I can get 2 or 3 recipes out of a cookbook that enter into my cooking repertoire. And so there are going to be different parts of this presentation that resonate for different people. But my hope is that each person is able to take a couple kernels of wisdom, to take a little bit and apply it and move forward. Hopefully more, but I would be happy with that. Dennis gave you sort of what I call the stiffy description of what I do and my background, but I wanted to take it back to when I was about 20 years old and how I got my start doing what I do. Imagine me 20 years old, dancing in the sunshine in Eureka, California, up in very northern California. The spotted owl was an endangered species at that time, and the harvesting of the old-growth redwoods in that area was damaging the ecosystem. And I was at this wonderful festival, dancing in the sunshine, listening to some band, which most likely had some steel drums associated, eating my veggie burrito, which had no napkin or no plate because, of course, we didn't want to use any paper products, benefiting the spotted owl. And suddenly, I had an epiphany. And the epiphany was that the timber companies really could not have cared less about this festival in the trees and this group of young people dancing and eating veggie burritos. That in order for the timber companies to make a difference in their decision making, it needed to be policymakers, purchasers of wood products, and other influencers like that to get involved in helping them make a decision. And it was really this connection for me about how does a nonprofit or how does a cause tell its story and get its story in front of the right people so those people will take the action that we want them to or that we hope that they will. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is how to do a little less dancing in the sunshine in the woods that is lots of fun but doesn't necessarily make a great difference, and how do we craft messages, how do we gear ourselves, how do we find the people that are really making the difference and who will really move things forward for ourselves. So now this is the first time I'm going to move a slide forward, so we'll hope that I can figure out how to do that. There we go. So before we dig into some of the deeper details, I really want to stress that all of our communications really need to be tied into our mission and goal. Communications are not an end to themselves, that whatever we do, they need to help our organizations move forward in what our goals are. I want to give an example, and this is sort of a hypothetical example. A health clinic may have a mission to reduce infant mortality rate in a particular neighborhood or in a particular town. And in order to do that, they need money, but they also need people to come into the clinic, and they might also need some government grants. So the goal of the organization is to reduce infant mortality, the mission is to reduce infant mortality. The goal might be to see 20% more patients than they saw the year before. And then that's where marketing comes in, reaching the donors in order to get them to come up with the money to fund the clinic, getting the clients to know that the clinic exists. And sometimes that might be finding social workers in the neighborhood who could influence those potential clients. And then also, if the clinic wants government contracts or state grants, it might be influencing particular policymakers. All of those things and all the strategies that you'll use to influence your donors, the potential clients, and the policymakers all roll up, and they all are tied into exactly what the organization's mission and goals are. So I'm going to start digging into this a little bit more. So the title of the presentation is telling your nonprofit story so people will listen. So let's start with the first part of that. Oh, your slides aren't appearing.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry. Again, I'm just learning how to do this all. I have Ben and Dennis sitting next to me. I'm fortunate enough to actually be in the FCI office. So they're watching what's going on, and they'll tap me on the elbow if I mess things up. So we're going to start with the first part of a presentation, title, Telling Your Nonprofit Story. And what do we really mean by that? What does it mean to tell your story? Well, there's the story that we tell. I went fishing with my Grandpa Jack and we caught a walleye. But when we talk about telling your nonprofit story, we both want to tell the story in a compelling way, but we also need to know that every message that comes into an individual is part of telling that story. And everything you do that touches on other people communicate what you do. So what exactly does that mean? So when I say everything, I mean everything. So messaging, we touched on that a little bit, or at least we said that we were going to touch on it. Your printed materials, your mass media, your social media, your logos. These are all of the things that we intentionally do to communicate who we are to other people. But then there's this whole other group of stuff that I'm going to call the unintentional. The unintentional is somebody calls your office and doesn't get a phone call back. There is a snowstorm on the way to your event. Now, it doesn't seem fair that you would get blamed. However, if the time of your event is at 6 o'clock and it happens to be rush hour and it happens to be on a snowy evening and someone is sitting in their car thinking, dang it, why did they schedule an event on a winter night in the dark where people would have to come through rush hour? Suddenly you're getting blamed a little bit for this thing. Not fair, but it's reality. Then that person shows up at your event, and maybe the event registration doesn't go quite as smoothly. I went to an event a couple of weeks ago, and there were a lot of people at the event. It was a cold evening, and the line for registration went out the door. Now, I had planned to be at this event, and I knew it would be warm inside, and I didn't bring my coat because I thought I was just going to go right in. As it turned out, I spent about 12 minutes standing outside in the cold waiting to get inside just to register for the event. The food at the event, you're not the caterer. However, you will get blamed, or you will get cheered for the quality of things. And I put on this down here, the bathroom smell. I had an experience. Dennis mentioned I was in HR earlier in my career, and I was consulting with a small Seattle startup that wanted more women to work there. And I had been doing HR, and this nonprofit, there were a couple of young guys running it, and they said, we just can't get any women to join our startup. And I started talking to them about the reasons why, and then I went into the restroom. And A, it did not smell so great. B, it was filthy. And C, lying in front of the toilet was the sports page of the newspaper. It was not a terribly friendly environment for anybody let alone a young woman or an older woman or any kind of woman. It felt like a guy's bathroom in a frat house. And these two guys in their early 20s were trying to make a go of it. So I want you to internalize this idea that everything you do tells the story about your organization. And under that unintentional category, most of those things seem very negative. The reason that they're negative is because when you get stuff right, nobody remembers. Nobody remembers and nobody acknowledges the event registration that went smoothly. Nobody notices when they go into a nice bathroom. Nobody notices when the food is good, maybe a little bit if it's really great. So we all need to kind of be on guard for those things that are telling people who we are that we may not be as aware of, and really get people to orient themselves towards the intentional things that we're doing around the messages that we're putting out and the actual stories that we're telling about our clients and our success stories.
So would you say, Suzanne, that most are paying more attention to the intentional side and not to the unintentional, or are those, I guess I'm just curious, I'm looking at, this, it seems like we spend a lot of time with the materials and the media and that kind of thing, and we don't pay as much attention to the little details that can matter.
So people will pay attention to your intentional messages when you get the other stuff right. People have a lot of difficulty. It's an excellent question, Dennis. But when your registration goes poorly and someone attends your event, when your feet are wet, it's really difficult to listen to the speaker. So you've got to nail all of the pieces in order to get somebody to pay attention. I suspect some of you have gotten solicitation letters or emails where there are typos. And think about how difficult it is for you to pay attention to what the organization is really asking when the graphic is messed up or there's a typo. So now we're going to get into this idea. This is the second part of the title, so people will listen. And what do we mean by listening when we say so people will listen? When I'm talking about listening today and being heard, what I'm really talking about is getting somebody to take an action. When somebody listens and hears you, they might make a donation. They might change their behavior. They might make a good decision like putting on a seatbelt or visiting a doctor or referring a friend. So when we talk about action, when we talk about listening and being heard through the rest of this presentation, that's what we're talking about. Does that make sense, Dennis?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Suzanne.
I see somebody asking a question. And
yeah, and I think this might be relevant to kind of neutralize it. This is an organization that has one-on-one meetings with their clients, but the office is very small and has no windows. And they've been concerned about the aesthetics of it and what it might say to visitors or clients. Do you have suggestions for how to optimize space? That's a specific question, but maybe more generally, what can you do to?
So I think you're asking an excellent question, and I think you're dead on to be thinking about it. If I were in that situation, I would be thinking about, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about resources, but first of all, how is your office painted? Is there a cute rug on the floor? Is the furniture comfortable? You might consider, and this might sound a little bit goofy, but depending on your organization, put some Christmas tree lights up. Embrace this idea. Turn it into a faux library. But think creatively in a way that embraces your space. And if your space really, really stinks, go to a cafe. Find a board member who has an office space where maybe they would let you meet there. I will say, actually, just to embarrass Forward Community Investments, you guys have the lights off in the entryway of the Forward Community Investments office. The office is a beautiful office space, but the light is off there. And so when you walk in, it's a little bit dark. That's the kind of thing that's an unintentional touch, but it's an opportunity to embrace the space because there is a beautiful space. So I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you.
Now that Okay, so now what? So now I've spent the last few minutes just defining the title of our talk. So now I want to get into kind of some of the better stuff. So I have this motto, which I stole from Arthur Ashe, which is start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And I love this motto in working with nonprofits because so many of us have limitations, like a small office space, or a small budget, or a small office, or board members who we might not be able to get as engaged as we hope. So you have to acknowledge those things, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And so a lot of the rest of our presentation is really going to be framed around what we're saying and what people are hearing, but really starting where you are, using what you have, and doing what you can. So the first thing, if I am working with an organization, the first thing I recommend that all organizations do in vein of starting where you are is doing an internal inventory. Really asking yourself, what are we already doing? Is it working? What could we be doing differently? And then asking other people what those experiences are like. How frequently are you sending out communications? Is your website up to date? The number of times, and I'm sure that almost everybody on the webinar has had the experience of going to a website looking for event information, and you can't find it on a website. Or the last time an organization touts their blog, but the last blog entry was 9 months ago. So really go through your website, your social media, your printed materials, your physical space, which we just talked about. Who is speaking on behalf of your organization, and are they doing a good job? And figure out exactly where they are. Then I want to come back to this idea that we talked about just a couple minutes ago, but getting things right. It's really important for you to know what's going well, where you're getting your traction, where people are hearing you, what things you're doing that are moving you forward. But you also need to be honest with yourself about what needs improvement, what needs to be tossed out, and if you screw up, you need to apologize. I want to share an experience that a friend of mine shared, but I'm just curious. I'm going to throw this out there as a question, and people can respond. But sort of epic fails that you've seen organizations do that really potentially alienated you. But please don't include the names of any organizations at risk of, me alienating more people today. But I want to share this experience. A friend of mine went to an event a couple of weeks ago, a major event for, excuse me, a fairly major Madison nonprofit. And this person was bidding on an experience. And the bidding was getting quite hot and heavy. It was a birthday party experience in a very special location. And she was bidding it up. And I think that the biddings got into, let's say, in the thousands, a couple $1,000s. And my friend ultimately lost the bid. And she was actually quite relieved. It turned out she'd had a couple of glasses of wine. And she wasn't terribly excited, as it turned out, to spend $2,000+ on this birthday party experience. So she was quite happy she didn't get it. And 2 days later, she got an email from the nonprofit saying, congratulations, you've won this experience. But she knew perfectly well that she had not. In fact, she had even had a conversation with the person who had bought the thing. And what had happened is that that woman had to back out, and the organization had chosen, without talking to my friend, to make the purchase on her behalf and put it on her credit card. This was highly irritating, as you can imagine, to my friend. This is somebody who's been a major donor of the organization. It's somebody whose husband runs a company who has partnered with the organization. And my friend was irritated. She called the organization, and the response was there was no apology. There was no, I'm so sorry that we got this wrong. It was just, oh, we thought you wanted it. We'll take it off your bill. And while that is a resolution, the organization had kind of messed up. And they really needed to help her help her to feel better about how they had just done this thing without asking, which seemed very atypical. And I know you're sitting here and you've been looking at the experiences that people had. Are there any?
One example that someone added, and if you have others of fails that are noteworthy to you, please feel free to send them through the chats, was an organization that provided no orientation to the goals or any context for why members of the committee were meeting. So it was even within the organization they didn't have a sense of what they were doing.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, and unfortunately, you know, we talked a little bit before about the unintentionally intentional, and I don't know what it is about human nature, and if somebody knows what it is about human nature, but we remember the bad stuff. With the exception of childbirth, which we seem to forget, people seem to remember the phone call that wasn't returned, the typo, the frumpy political candidate, the technology that didn't work, the rebuff, the missed registration. So before we really start moving things forward, we've got to start where we are, do an inventory, and make sure that we're getting things right. Now I want to talk a little bit about this idea, the second of Arthur Ashe's quote, use what you have. Thinking about what your assets are when you are developing a marketing plan is critical. We all have different assets. You may not have a large office space, or you might have a large office space. You might have supporters that can help you. You probably have connections. You have skills. You have collaborators. You might have other nonprofit partners, your staff, your board. When a lot of us are creating communications plans, we tend to think about our technology, our media, our events, which are great. But in order for that to all click together, we need to really come up with a holistic picture and take advantage of those things that are at our fingertips in order to create the most compelling plan, and frankly, because we're nonprofits, the most efficient plan. I'm not sure Microsoft, which has a $1 zillion marketing budget, needs to partner in order to get their marketing done, but most of us who have limited, less in-house expertise, less in-house budget, less technology, less of everything, we've got to be a little scrappier. We've got to bring our best game and pull in everything we can. So now we get to do what you can. And for me in this presentation, this is where fun is really going to start. Because the do what you can is really where we're going to start building our plans that are going to get us to the action of the people we want. Again, I want to reiterate this idea that we want to be mission and goal driven. And you want to be really clear about what actions you want to see happening. I keep coming back to a donation, an activity, a behavior. And I don't want to miss this point on this slide about setting measurable goals. When we're building our plans, which we're going to do really starting on the next slide, you want to know why you're there, what you're doing it for, and how you're going to measure it. Now, we get to what I call Suzanne's egg. And if there, I don't know if there are any of my clients on the phone or other people, but for years I've been sharing what I call my marketing egg with people. And I use this analogy that in order to crack an egg, there are lots of little taps that happen. You take your egg and you crack it against the counter, and you have the option to either take that egg and throw it against the counter and have it explode, or you have the option to give it lots of little taps. And in order to move people to action, each individual, and think of each individual who you want to perform some kind of action, that person is going to require a lot of little taps in order to get them to do something. I want to share actually an experience with our sponsor, BMO Harris. I watch TV, and not a lot of TV, and I occasionally see the BMO Harris ads on TV, and like most of us, you know, I don't really pay a lot of attention. And in my neighborhood, there's a BMO Harris billboard right down at the end of my block. And BMO Harris is sponsoring this event today. And it turns out that BMO Harris is the banker of the parent-teacher organization at my son's middle school. Now, if you think of me as the marketing egg, and what BMO Harris really wants me to do is open an account with BMO Harris. And of course, who would open an account based on just a billboard? However, as I drove down my street today and I was thinking about all of these little things, I was also thinking about a bank that I do have an account with who did something a little bit irritating. They took a really big fee to what's it called, to change money. I had some English pounds. And I started to think, I want to switch my account. And you know what popped into my head? BMO Harris. And the reason it popped into my head was because I'd seen the ad, I'd seen the billboard, they're a sponsor today, somebody mentioned them to me, and suddenly there's the potential that I move to action. And that is, I think, how most of us make purchasing and action decisions. We might read something in the paper. We might see somebody's post on email, on Facebook. We might attend an event or be invited to an event. So if you think of each person as this egg, our job is to build a strategy that cracks their egg. And all of these little strategies together really help to amplify our message. Now, I talked about this egg as in each person being an egg. Now, of course, from the majority of people that you are talking to, you're not coming up with individual strategies for each individual person. So, for example, Ben, who's sitting here, to get him to open an account with BMO Harris, it might be a whole different set of things. He's a little younger than I am, so probably, someone would have to blog about it or tweet about it or have a picture on something else. I don't know. But anyhow, so he's in a different demographic than I am. So we really want to think about how do we craft these eggs or sets of eggs to target groups of people. And I'm sure many of you have heard this word, target audience. No marketing presentation would be complete without talking about target audiences. And what we really mean is groups of people that we want to talk to. And target audiences are really a way of saying, we can't talk to everybody separately, so we're going to clump people together and make good guesses about how to talk to them and how to reach them. And marketers typically talk about targeting based on age or geography or education level, income, interest, gender, employment. But those target audiences typically need to be broken down even further to really get strategies and messages that speak to individuals in a stronger way. So I made a list of hypothetical examples. For example, male college seniors, Latino women with children who are single, unemployed people older than 55 in Green Bay. And the breakdown of how you come up with who your specific target audiences are really depends on your goal. For example, if you have a goal to advocate for a particular piece of legislation, your target audience, your entire target audience might be policymakers, but your policymakers might be broken down by geographic region. It might be policymakers who voted in favor of particular healthcare legislation that is of interest to you. And so you want to drill down further and further depending on what your goals are. Are there any questions? Actually, I'm going to back up. Before we move into the next section, and there was a lot of definitions there and a lot of rambling, it felt like, on my part. Ben, can you share some questions?
There are a couple questions. And so I think one would be just as you're looking at who is the target audience, if you feel like you serve the full community, how do you kind of clarify those types of personas or identities to help that organization kind of start moving forward with their plan?
So when you're serving a community, if you serve the entire community, let's take, for example, a public library would be targeted. You would hope that it would serve the entire community. I'm not sure it necessarily does, but let's go with the assumption that a public library serves the entire community. Your goal might be to get action from every member of your community, but your target audiences, each of the people within your community, is going to access information in different places and feel sensitive to different kinds of messages. So for example, if you want to communicate to the entire community, if you really want tween boys to come into the library because you know demographically that tween boys, and what I mean tweens, 11, 12, and 13-year-old boys are not accessing the library, you want to think about promoting programs that bring them into the library and get them excited. So your goal is around the entire community, but you still need to tailor what you're doing to individual groups of people. Hopefully that makes sense.
So is that, Suzanne, so is that like prioritizing? So we're trying to serve the whole community, but where do we think we can have the greatest impact based on our resources or the message that we're trying to send?
I think you're exactly right, Dennis. And I'll be honest, when people say that they want to serve the entire community, I always want to drill down a little bit deeper, because when, for example, with the public library example, it's an organization that serves the entire community, but as we know, not everybody is going to the public library. So assuming that we have limited resources, we want to go back to our goals and our mission and say, it can be very expensive and very hard to move everybody in our entire community to action. So who is it most important for us to get action from? And if it's tween boys, or you want more elderly people to participate in book clubs, or you want more science fiction books to be checked out, whatever those things are, and those tie into your goals, looking at your target audiences and prioritizing your energies will give you the biggest bang for the buck. Good follow-up question.
Great.
Yeah, Ben.
One other question that came up, and I'm going to generalize it a little bit, is how do you make decisions about potentially hiring marketing companies or others to help you with some of the marketing work that you're doing, whether it be sending out bulk mail to clientele or other types of decisions? What are the kind of questions or considerations you'd advise an organization to take?
So Ben, I don't know if you can clarify. So is this question how to hire a good firm, or how to decide where to focus your marketing dollars?
I think it might be a little bit more on the how does it focus. I think the question was, is it smart and does it pay to hire a marketing company to do these types of work? But more generally speaking, how would you go about making those types of decisions?
So I think everything you want to do, you want to think about as holistically as possible. So direct mail is very expensive. But direct mail, when you can tie it into 3 or 4 other things that you're doing, so for example, maybe it's a direct mail piece which has an activity associated with it, and there's an online video that you can go to, and there's a Facebook page that links in. So, if we go back to that marketing egg. So when you're thinking about your strategies, you want to think about them as puzzle pieces. And so it's a little bit worrisome when somebody says, we're thinking about hiring a direct mail firm. My first question would be, how does direct mail fit into the overall structure of what you're trying to accomplish? Why do you believe that your target audience will be sensitive, and that will be the methodology that sticks? And I ask the same question about Facebook. I know a lot, when I first started doing nonprofit marketing consulting, websites were all the rage. Now, of course, every organization has a website, but at that time, they did not. And again, it came back to this: you want to be as purposeful as possible, tie it into the other activities, and make sure it gets you as far as you can towards meeting your mission and goal. Any other questions before we kind of move on to?
I do have one more, and this might fit into your next session, so please feel free to say we're going to cover this in just a minute. But for agencies that are multifaceted and might have several different types of target groups, one might be people they're serving, another might be businesses that are working with them for contracting services, and a third might be a different group. Do you take that same kind of approach of looking at it like a puzzle when you have your different audiences, and then how do you kind of create a cohesive plan, or how do you approach that?
That's a good question, Ben. And let me jump into, we're going to do a little case study, which I think starts to touch on exactly that.
Great, okay.
Okay, so I want you to all picture me sitting in my office. I had some technical problems yesterday, and found myself working at about 10 o'clock last night, and I wanted to come up with a case study. So the case study that I came up with was the Hamster Health Advocacy Group, otherwise known as HAG. And so hopefully, for those of you who are paying attention, this will give you a little chuckle. This is, of course, a mythical organization that I created in my office last night. So the mission of our organization is to assure that all domestic hamsters live happy and healthy lives. And our goal is to reduce mortality and the runaway rate of domestic hamsters by 20% in 2014. And our sub-goals are what we really want our communications campaign to do is to persuade children not to squeeze their hamsters too hard, to convince parents to clean the cages more frequently, for pet store owners to accept hamster returns, because the statistical research shows that half of infant mortality is because parents are tired of their kids having hamsters and they have to take matters into their own hands. And last but not least, we want to pass laws to protect hamsters so those same parents aren't taking matters into their own hands. So what we're going to do now is to take the Hamster Health Advocacy Group, and my apologies if I have totally offended the hamster owners amongst you. We had a hamster for quite a while, and we do love our hamsters. But what we're going to do now is to do just what Ben was asking. And for some reason, my slide's not. Oh, there we go. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to build our HAG plan. So, and again, HAG stands for Hamster Health Advocacy Group. And there are a lot of different people that we want to try to reach in order to reach the goals that we said before. We need to reach pet store owners. We want to reach young children. We want to reach older children. We want to reach some policymakers to help them pass our the Hamster Protection Act. Teachers, grandparents, parents, and veterinarians. Now, a lot of the strategies that we have and a lot of strategies that we put in place have the potential to hit lots of different people. So, for example, the pet store owner is, probably connected technically, so Twitter is appropriate. The pet store owner is invested in the general pet environment and industry, and is probably going to be interested in animal advocacy kinds of events. Mass media, that might mean a news segment on the news, or a little documentary, or a nice article in the Sunday paper about hamster protection. The pet store owner is probably going to be on our distribution list for our email, because maybe we share health tips about hamsters. And then I had this idea about bathroom ads at cafes. So a lot of things happen in cafes in a lot of our communities, and a lot of cafes have started to put notices on the inside doors. It turns out that people can lend you their undivided attention. So the pet store owners probably aren't going to the bathrooms during the day in the cafes because they're in their pet shops, but the pet store owners probably are going to go visit their vet. So as you can see with each of these strategies, whether it's tweeting about what's going on, your annual event, your email, each of these strategies is hitting different groups of people. They might need to be tweaked a little bit. So for example, maybe the brochures in the vet office for a large animal veterinarian might be geared around not having your cat or dog eat a hamster, whereas the brochure in the vet office where they're treating guinea pigs and hamsters and mice and rats might be more about treating mites on hamsters in order to reduce hamster mortality. I'm hoping that some people are finding this at least a little bit amusing. Anyway, and that my sense of humor isn't too offensive. The other thing in digging down, actually I'm going to go back to the previous slide. You'll see that middle box, which was our mass media, and your mass media can be broken down into radio, newspapers, TV segments, local weeklies, anything that's hitting lots and lots and lots of people. So depending on your organization and what you're trying to accomplish, this might be a strategy that hits lots and lots of people. Getting back, for example, to the person who messaged and said they want to reach everyone in their community. The mass media may be your approach. So then you really want to think about how do you break down your mass media strategy into something deeper. Just like we talked about our target audiences, you know, you can't just say, well, we want to reach all women because women get their information in different places. Similarly, the strategy of mass media will likely need to be broken down. And I just came up with a sample with your mass media pitches. So for example, in January, I'm suggesting that the HAG has a mass media pitch, helping your hamster stick to her New Year's resolutions. In February, which of course has Valentine's Day, don't love your hamster to death. In March, cabin fever, build your hamster a box maze for exercise. The media loves stuff that is timely and resonates with what people are already thinking about. The same can be true of all of us. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that I suspect quite a few of you are listening to me and maybe making a Thanksgiving shopping list at the same time. I know when I walked in the office and was chatting with Ben and Dennis, we were talking about Thanksgiving. So is there some pitch around this time of year that can have to do with gratitude? Or if you are an animal rights organization that talks about cutting down on how much meat you're eating, if you're a health organization around not overeating or getting some exercise before or after with your family. So breaking down your strategies even further allows you to target a little bit more deeply, but also resonate with whatever people are already thinking about. I always think the more people already know about what you're doing, the easier your pitch will be. There's a famous case study about Sonicare toothbrushes. And probably most of you know what Sonicare toothbrushes are. They're basically an electric toothbrush that uses sonic energy to clean your teeth. But most people just think about them as an electric toothbrush. And I heard the inventors speak, and he said the only reason that this product did well was because other people had educated the market about the value of electric toothbrushes. If I had invented this and the electric toothbrush hadn't already existed, this would have failed. But people who care about their teeth were already paying attention to this kind of technology, and I was able to move it forward. So paying attention to places where people are already educated and pushing your message a little bit further. I have been involved a little bit. The Humane Society in San Francisco has a campaign for Meatless Mondays. And the idea is that rather than getting 14% of people in the United States to be vegetarians, if each of us committed to just having Meatless Mondays, it is the equivalent of 14% of the United States becoming vegetarians in terms of reducing the number of animals that are used, assuming, of course, that you don't then up your bacon intake on Tuesday. But I don't know if you heard Dennis behind saying, bacon, right, Meatless Mondays, Dennis. So most of us know that all of us know that meat kills animals. We all know that meat probably isn't all that great for us when eaten in quantities. We know that stuff. We have been educated, which makes it, for the Humane Society, you can say, you know all this stuff already. You've already been educated. The message now is, just give it up one day a week, which is a much easier message than all of the reasons why it's a good thing. So does that make sense?
It does. That's a good illustration.
Are there any other questions that have popped up since then?
Not yet, but if you do have questions, feel free to submit them. We have about 10 minutes to go, so we'll hold some of those questions for the very end to make sure that we get to them.
Perfect. Now, the previous slide showed how you drill down in terms of your media strategy, and that was an example. This very complicated, or seemingly looking complicated matrix shows how you want to break down your communications plan month by month. And I actually provided for community investments I created a 2015 plan, which Dennis and Ben will post so people can download it, including all the fancy colors. But this shows how week after week your organization can say, for example, how many times during the year do we want to send out some kind of media release? Do you want to send something out 5 times a year? Well, when do you want it to happen? What about op-eds? Where's your annual auction? How many times a year do you want to have house parties? How do you schedule yourself throughout the year so you know what is happening, you can prepare, you can be proactive, and most important, you can gain traction, which amplifies your message and moves people to action. Are there any questions on that chart? I know it looks a little bit complicated. I also, I'm not suggesting necessarily that the topics on the left-hand column are the strategies that any particular organization should embrace, but rather this is meant as a sample. So if anybody has any questions about that, I know when you see lots of blocks like this, it sort of seems a little bit blurry. So I'm going to keep moving, but Ben, let me know.
Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of picking your strategy, you know, I keep coming back to this idea of your goals and your mission. So I'm going to assume you've gotten that piece. But really, when you're picking your strategies, you really want to know what your limitations are. Budget, resources, expertise, training. I had a conversation with Dennis a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I love my clients. I've been hired by lots of wonderful organizations. And the most heartbreaking thing is when we create a plan and the organization can't execute. And so I don't want any person on the call to create a plan and not be able to execute because you hadn't done that internal soul searching and to make sure that you have the capacity or the expertise or the time to make it happen. You are better off having a trimmed down plan than having a plan that you can't execute and sits on a shelf and nobody remembers if you had done it. I think Ben's going to throw out a poll actually at this point as we're talking about building new strategies. Also, knowing your strengths when you're building your plan, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. Knowing what your budgets are, knowing what expertise you have in-house, and what expertise you need to hire outside for. What are your facilities? If your only office space is that small, dark space, think about renting a little bit more office space or borrowing some or doing a little barter with somebody. And what alliances can you build? Ben did the, okay.
Yeah, we can launch we have just launched a poll. What is the status of your marketing and communications plan, just to give a sense of that. And so if the listeners can respond to that, that'd be wonderful.
Okay.
And so the options, we have a plan and it's working great. We have a plan but cannot seem to get it going. There's a rumor that a plan may exist, but I haven't seen it.
Right.
We don't have a plan but are concerned developing them. So far we've had a little over, about half of the people have responded. A third are reporting that they do not have a plan but are considering one. Another third say that they have one but cannot seem to get it started or going.
And so what I'm going to point out is when I'm looking at these statistics, and Ben, tell me, do the people on the phone get to see these bars, these nifty bars?
I will demonstrate them for them to see now.
So what I'm seeing is that so far 34% of people say we have a plan but we can't seem to get going, and 16% say there's a rumor that a plan exists. They haven't seen. That means 50% of you have plans that aren't working, which is really that idea of you need to like pause right there and come back to these ideas of start where you are, pull out those plans, find that plan, figure out what's working, and understand where your limitations are something that you can break through and move forward, or if it's just time to move on. I have a client that I've worked with, and the marketing director just really, really wants the executive director to write a blog. The marketing director thinks that the executive director has a lot to say, and the executive director does, but the executive director does not have the time. It's never going to happen. So they need to move forward and think about what kind of partnerships they can come up with. Okay, Dennis is making me a sign saying 5 minutes, so I'm going to start getting moving. Okay. So know your strategies. Good. Thanks for the poll. Okay, wait a second. Oh, I'm in the wrong screen. There we go. Okay. So when you're picking your strategies, and I'm going to start just cruising here, be realistic about your capacity and only start things that you can maintain. The two middle bullets there, be clever and being scrappy, that is my bread and butter, is that helping organizations to come up with things that are a little bit different, taking some risks and standing out. I want to share with you on this next slide, the slide's a little bit dark, but yesterday in my mail, literally yesterday, I received 5 pieces of direct mail asking me for money. Guess how many got opened? 0. Now, I was kind of busy. I was working on this presentation. But unless you can stand out and be a little bit different, you're going to end up being recycled. And these are all a couple of these are organizations that I've given to. They're all organizations that do good work. Some of them, I'm not quite sure why I'm on the Catholic Charities list since I'm Jewish. But, you know, we'll just go with that. So, but I just wanted to point out that unless you're a little bit different, you might end up in my recycling bin. So I wanted to share, and Dennis will be happy because I'm going to move through these really quickly. And then I believe the whole presentation is going to be online, so you can kind of come back to it. So I love this. This was a piece of marketing piece that was done by the Planning Council out of Milwaukee. And this was a package of microwave popcorn, which had been shrink wrapped and put in an envelope. And if you can read, it says, take the pop quiz inside after enjoying your complimentary afternoon snack. See how much you know about what the Planning Council was up to in 2010. There was a call to action. I got a snack, and it was cool packaging. I kept it if I paid attention. This was an invitation to attend a leadership event with Stanford University. It came in a box, not a custom box, just an off-the-shelf box that had been decorated with some stickers. And the shred inside had wildflower seeds. So there was even a call to action there. Now, a box is not something we're going to send in the mail to all 10,000 of our supporters. But if you've got 50 policymakers that you really want to get to your annual event, maybe it's something to consider. And it was sure cool. This was Planned Parenthood, did trading cards. Now, who doesn't like a trading card with multicolored condoms on it? Now, that is something to keep. And on the back of each one of these cards was statistics around different issues and calls to action for Planned Parenthood. Again, it was clever. It took a risk. It stood out. It was tactile. This was one that I also particularly liked. This was Jewish Social Services in Madison had a 30th birthday, and instead of inviting me to another event, they sent me a birthday party kit. There was a balloon, there was a coupon for an ice cream sundae, there was a cool birthday party invitation, and they said what they really wanted for their birthday was for me to make a donation, which I did. It was different. It was clever. It was outside the box. And as you can tell, or maybe you can't tell, but it was a very inexpensively printed, off-the-shelf idea that was different. And this, last but not least, of my sort of fun things, this was a personalized piece. Again, you might not want to do this for all 10,000 of your supporters, but my husband was in the hospital for a few days, and about 2 weeks later, he got a personalized invitation asking him to honor his caregivers now that he was recovered. And this was turning a client into a donor through a very personalized piece that, again, stood out. Okay, what am I down to, Dennis? 2 minutes?
-2.
-2. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about measurement really quickly. Make sure to do it. If you're not getting things right, if you're not getting your plan off the ground, come back to the Arthur Ashe quote and start all over again. Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And last but not least, no presentation would be complete without the key points. Be mission and goal driven. Understand that everything communicates and that communication drives action. Getting stuff right, and if you don't, apologize. Understanding your target audiences. Building a plan with strategies to drive action. Be realistic. Those 55% of you that have plans that haven't been implemented, maybe not quite so realistic. Don't be boring. Measure and test and adjust often. And last but not least, if you have any questions, or ideas or anything else, please feel free to email me. I love hearing from people, and I love talking about this stuff, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks, everyone, for joining us today. The presentation, as all of our presentations, will be available on our website for download later. If you want to have a copy of the slides, we'll also include the tools. There will be a follow-up message here shortly with some feedback for us and for our presentations. It's part of our logic model here, and to make sure that we're providing a good experience for our participants. We also will be sending out, probably within the next couple of weeks, a survey to everyone that has participated in our webinars this year to find out what kind of topics they'd be looking to hear more about in 2015 as we line up our series for next year. So thanks to BMO Harris for their support. We also want to do a quick pitch for our last webinar of the year with John Keckhaver of the Wisconsin Nonprofits Association. I think it's a great follow-on piece, as Suzanne has talked about communication today. And he's going to be talking about advocacy and the nonprofit policy agenda, and looking for ways to help people get more involved and get more support around advocacy in 2015. So thanks again to BMO Harris, thanks again to Suzanne, and thanks to everyone for joining us. Have a great holiday if that's your celebration this week, and we will talk to you all next month.
Bye.